Welcome to Unhidden Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Amina Norris. This episode is a real treat because I sit down with my mother, Brenda Harker, a veteran professor and the matriarch of our family. During my interview with her, she reveals her experience of growing up in segregated Atlantic City. We travel back in time, and by the end of our conversation, I finally understand what it means to make America work for us. Please listen and share your thoughts on this episode in the comment section. I started interviewing people in the family, and I realized that I was remiss because I can't start this whole process without starting with you. So, you as my mother, and also the person who really is essential in teaching me everything, I can't start this interview process without starting with you. So you will be the first interview.
Okay.
Share with us, talk about your experience in school. And going back to like going to school in Atlantic City, and can you talk to us about that? And you've been to different schools, what
Mhm.
in different degrees. So can you share with us what being in school was like for you?
I always actually liked school. Um, I think it was difficult for me because I was a slow reader, but I liked information and I liked learning. And when you asked me that question, I thought about when I was in when I was 6 years old. We went um, to a museum or the zoo in Philadelphia. And so that made me very happy. And I really, it was an all black school and it was called New Jersey Avenue School. And it went up to, I think, sixth grade. And then when we went to junior high, we were bused into Ventnor, which was a white town.
Mm.
But I actually found one of my teachers, Mrs. Butler, in a poetry book in a reference section at San Francisco State. I was like, oh, Miss Bryant. Nobody even knew that she was a poet.
Mm.
It was like, I wish I had kept all the information, but I guess it's easily gotten again.
So
But it
wait,
was,
when you went to the all black school, that was because it was segregated or just because you lived in a black neighborhood?
that's segregation.
No, because a lot of times, well, I guess, but I mean, did they bust you because of trying to integrate your?
Well, they were trying to integrate. By the time they bussed us, I was in junior high, seventh grade, and
Mm.
I remember I made friends with this white kid, and the teacher. I was in art class, and I really loved my art teacher. And the assignment was to draw what's across the street from your house. And across the street from my house was an apartment building where my Aunt Mabel and Charles and all of their kids lived. And next door to that was just an empty lot.
Mhm.
And the boy said to me, Brenda, you live in the ghetto? And I
Mm.
was like, it never occurred to me that I lived in the ghetto because I drew what was across the street from my house, the apartment building, and this empty lot.
Wow.
And it was a odd way of finding out. I guess that was the first time I ever thought of economic status or
That you
race. Yeah.
So before that, you just grew up with being surrounded by your family. Can you describe your neighborhood? Like what that, who lived on the street with you and who your.
Well, everybody knew each other. Nobody locked the doors. And I remember we lived on one end. My grandmother and grandfather lived in the middle. It was row houses. And Jimmy Griffin lived at the far end. And it was Drexel Avenue. And Sandra lived on Drexel Avenue. We knew all the kids. On the other end, was Richmond Avenue, Mary Brock and Christine Brock and Barbara Brock and all of those guys and Yvonne Blocker. We used to just know everybody, and everybody was on friendly terms, and we went to the church there. And
Ooh,
I learned how to do the Charleston
but
in
who is we?
church, and my mother was like, Brenda, I was a junior usher. And I was, I got it, Mom, look.
But who is we? Like, who was we? Who'd you live with?
I lived with my mother and father and my sister Carmen.
And you had another sister too, right?
Dolores. Yeah. She was probably about to be married. She lived in North Jersey at my aunt's, and she was going to nursing school. So it wasn't that she was so much older than us, but she was about 6 or 7 years older.
Mhm. So you and Aunt Carmen, and then your mom and dad, and then you lived. When you say your grandmother and grandfather lived on the same street, that was your mom's parents or your dad's parents?
My father's. Those were the Herberts. When we left Virginia, my father, after he got out of the service, while he was in the service, we were living in Virginia with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. And then after he got out of the service, he moved to Virginia, but he couldn't find work. And so he moved the family to Atlantic City.
Mhm. So all this you were describing was in Atlantic City.
Yeah. And so I met my brothers, half brothers, there in Atlantic City, and my cousins, Jimmy, Carlton, Ronald, and Sheila.
So
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 that was a culture shock coming from Lawrenceville, Virginia to the city.
how old were you when that happened?
It was 1949. I think I was probably about 6 or 5.
So when you went to school in grade school, you were in an all black school in Atlantic City, and then you
Yeah.
started being
But
bused.
I didn't know that my mom was very apolitical, and she didn't allow us to refer to racial terms. So
What
I
did you
really,
say?
huh?
What did you do?
I just called people by their names.
Mhm,
And she always taught everybody's equal, everybody's the same, you know.
mhm.
And I never thought of myself as being deprived. That's why I was so shocked that I lived in the ghetto. Me, this ain't no ghetto. This is where I live. You know, and
Yeah.
mom, you could and definitely couldn't say the N word, please.
Mhm, mhm,
That was the cardinal sin.
mm. So then where'd you go to high school?
I went to Atlantic City High School, and Atlantic City High School was made into a parking lot.
Mm,
And it's like all of our memories are gone. Of course, I still have the friends, you know, so that part of it's great.
yeah.
But they're taking the memories away.
Mm,
And you don't think of that when they demolish a building. I
mm.
never thought of it as being old and dilapidated. I don't know why they um, flattened it.
Mm. So, but your friends that you met all those friends in high school?
Junior high.
Mhm. And also all of you were bused, and then so then with Atlantic.
They were living in Midtown. We lived in the inlet,
Mhm,
which is by the water, um, uptown. And then Barbara, I guess Donna lived kind of midtown, but Barbara and Duck, they lived now, which is uptown, downtown. They
so
lived
this
downtown.
before the casinos?
Oh, way before, but they always gambled in Atlantic City. even though it wasn't legalized until many years later.
And what
My
did your
father was a house painter.
okay.
So he actually was in business for himself, but he never was able to finish things. And he was like, he would paint, and then people would be calling, "Is Joe there? This is so and so from the 500 Club. He started this job." I don't think of myself as a person who would not finish the job. But and now I can recognize people who don't finish. And when I get somebody to do something in my house and they're not a finisher, like, oh no, that's it for you, kid.
All right, so all right, so let me just ask you this, and you
I have
talked
to
a
tell
little.
you this though. I
Okay.
think not Barbara, but Donna and Jimmy Jack were probably responsible for us initially integrating and meeting the people who were like uptown. I can't remember which was uptown and downtown.
I don't,
Downtown, the downtown folks like Barbara and Nancy and
so,
all
but
of.
I don't think that people will understand the difference unless you explain, like, what's the difference between like uptown or downtown?
Okay, Atlantic City was segregated.
Hmm.
So I think Pacific Avenue separated, like if you were on the north side of Pacific Avenue, it was black. And on the south side, oh, I get really mixed up with north, south.
It doesn't matter. So one side
Right.
was white, one side was black.
Yeah, right. And we lived in the inlet and we lived Atlantic Avenue, I think, was the demarcation.
Mhm.
And then certainly if you got on
Pacific
Pacific Avenue, that it was all white up there. And then it went uptown. If you went downtown, there were lots of blacks who lived downtown. And so there was a kind of a rivalry between the uptown and downtown blacks.
Mhm.
Not real, not seriously, but if
And
you
then
were
you named a
felt
lot of
you were cool.
names, but most of the people you named were like your like friends, but then like Jimmy Jack was your cousin.
Yeah. My father had Irene, Charlotte, Mabel, Sis. He had, I think, four or five sisters. And everybody stayed in Atlantic City. Do these things, I had the feeling that it's live. Because when I just came back from shutting the door, I was talking to you and I'm like, that's not her.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting trying to, I'm trying to figure out how to get the folks like the aunties, like everyone on Zoom, so this is a generational gap thing. So we're learning. But you were explaining that Aunt Carmen really was the last person to hold the connection to Atlantic City, and you left. When did you leave Atlantic City,
I left Atlantic City in 66.
and where'd you go?
Well, I had actually tried to leave a couple of times before, but I could never last anywhere. Like I moved to New York and I stayed with some friends, Peachy and Sonny, and they got tired of me. So then I moved to 244th Street. Why would anybody move? I didn't know what I was doing. And I was working all the way downtown in Wall Street. And it was just, so I finally said, I have to go someplace where it's not easy for me to get back home.
Mhm.
So at first I decided to go to Florida. And I was talking to a friend. We used to work at the Wonder Gardens in Atlantic City. And he was saying, why are you going to Florida? And I was like, because, I could do the same thing I'm doing here, which is wait waiting tables. And so he said, why don't you go someplace you really want to go? And he said, where do you really want to go? And I don't know where it came from. I was like, San Francisco.
Mm.
And so he was a musician, and he was with Carmen McRae's band. She was a jazz singer. And he said, we're going out next month. I'll ask the woman that we stay with runs a boarding house and see if you can stay there. And it just happened like that, and things just put that out there, and it started happening.
Wow.
And they ended up meeting me at the airport.
Mm. That's amazing. So, and then you went to, you ended up going to college when you got here.
Yeah, right? Well, everybody, things were starting to happen. This is the time of the sit-ins, and the country was forced to open the doors. And so I had never thought of myself as a college person on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. But everybody out here was going to college, and I was like, I should go too. Mm. So I ended up going to San Francisco State.
Experience. Did you feel like your schooling in San Francisco State, and how did that change your life, or, how is that different? Because you started talking about how people in San Francisco were in school, and that was different from what you had experienced before.
Well, everybody was kind of like a revolutionary. So people, that was part of it, changing your life, going to school. It changed the kind of jobs that I was doing. Like I used to work as a cocktail waitress or food waitress. And so now I was working in a bank. I was doing installment credit.
So when you, can you tell us like what it was like, living through that time, like with the activism?
Well, when I was in New Jersey, to be perfectly honest, I didn't even know anything about what was going on. I mean, it could have been no revolution or not all those things. The only thing I remember is the March on Washington, because Carmen and I wanted to go, and my mother was terrified. She was like, oh no, you might get killed.
So you moved to San Francisco.
But I went back to New Jersey first, and then I started saving my money. And when I decided to come out, I actually had saved about $1,000. Mm-hmm. And so the interesting thing is I was calling a friend of mine, Penny, who lived in New York. And when I called, the person who answered the phone, who I knew, she said, oh, Penny, she moved to San Francisco. And I'm like, what? I'm going to San Francisco. And I was leaving out of New York. So when I got here, I looked her up, and she said, are you looking for a job? And I'm like, yeah. And so she said, this friend of mine is hiring census takers. Mm. And would you like to do it? So I was taking the census in Chinatown.
Yeah. So you, how did you meet my father?
He was a revolutionary, and there used to be just people go by and give you the power sign, and we'd always see each other because there were lots of people who had that spirit. Yeah. And because everything was very new to me, because I was from New Jersey and consciousness was at 0. And then I fall into this boom of consciousness. I'm reading W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass.
Wow. So that changed your life then?
Oh, it changed my life tremendously.
Yeah. Wow.
because
So,
it gave you pride and respect, because he had never thought about Black people doing anything or having the kind of range that white people have. So we stereotype Black people ourselves.
so you're talking a little bit about this, but can you describe like what racism or discrimination has been like for you?
I hate to say this, but I guess I should be glad. I think growing up with my mother, I never thought of racism. And I would think of something else. Because I remember one time I was teaching a class. It was a Black Studies class, and there were a few whites in the class. And we were talking about being profiled, and people were saying, this would happen to them when they would go in the store. And so one of the white students, I said, what happens to you when you go in the store and people follow you around? And she said, oh, I just think that it was that day. And I thought, that's interesting. But the fact that how did this relates to me, I don't.
Well, I don't. Can I say
I always thought that I was just a human being, and
you
so
did
I
tell
never
us that?
limited myself to think, even though it may have been happening to me, I never. And I had white friends, I had Black friends.
But I do remember you saying like you saw yourself as a human being or an American, and you didn't. There was a time when you taught us that not like to say I'm a Black American.
Oh, I hate that. Or African American.
So you just say I'm an American.
That's what I would like to do. Or an American of African descent.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That's a lot of words.
I know it's so long, but the thing is, it's limiting to put all these hyphenated words together. It's like,
Well, if you were
what
Italian,
culture do you know other than American culture?
Black culture.
Black culture is American culture.
No, a Black culture is a unique culture within America, right? We have our own culture. We have our own music, we have our own food, we have our own art, we have our own culture. That's outside of whiteness. Like the people you talked about, like W.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass, they are Americans, but they are also unique experiences because of being Black, right?
And being American too.
So
Because they
it's
wouldn't
both.
have had those experiences outside of America.
But do you think that like when you said about the student saying to you, the boy saying to you, "Oh, you live in the ghetto," and you saying like, "I didn't," because what I think from what I'm hearing you say is that your Blackness is so connected to your Americanness that you don't see them separate because
Well,
you
I
like.
don't know if I would agree with that or not.
Mhm.
I think Black history is American history. I
Yeah.
don't think it can happen outside of America. I mean, of course it can happen. It happened in South Africa and it happens in African countries. But the experience that we have is an American experience. And I don't want to diminish it by saying, oh no, it's something different, because we all developed this way because America mistreated us.
Mm-hmm. Well, then let me ask you this question, because I think this is very instructive, and so I'm just learning from you. But do you think that a white person, like if we were white, we would have the same experience because we're Americans?
I
That's
don't
what I don't
think
understand.
white.
Huh?
I don't want to be white, and I don't even want to do if I were white, because I think there's uniqueness in who we are. And I do see a culture,
Mhm.
that's underlined by African culture. But if we went to Africa right now, we would be foreigners.
Right, because we're Americans, but I'm saying we
Yeah.
are, we
So
have,
I'm saying, how can you take America out of the equation?
well, okay, let's say this. When you went because you've been to Africa, right?
Yeah.
And when you go there and when you've been to countries where there's a predominance of Black people, do you see a connectedness that even though you're American, or you don't see that?
I do, but I don't know if they see it.
Mhm.
And I I understand all that. I'm just saying, I think when you hyphenate somebody, like you don't hear people saying, I'm German American, or I mean, if their family's been here a couple of generations, they're just Americans.
Right,
So I
but I
want that same,
think,
yeah.
yeah, okay. I mean, I get it.
I don't want to impose because it's not there. It's not. If you leave here and you go to Senegal, or if you go to anywhere, you still will be an American.
Right. So the first time I recognized that what you're saying to me, I was 19. And it was when you took me to France and we had to get uh in line, and it was like everyone with the US passport get in this line, all the Americans in this line and everybody else in the other line, and I had a US
Long
passport. So I had gotten the line with the US citizens line, and that's the first time I was like, "Oh, I'm an American." But I
yeah.
was almost 20 years old.
But
Because
I felt the same way. When I went out of the country, that's when it hit me that I was an American, because there was always something that was kind of like when you wanted to say American.
like you
But
were
now I write it on all the forms. I put American.
So do you feel I guess what I am trying to get, and I don't know if I'm gonna get it, but I guess the what I'm trying to get to is because I feel like when I hear what you're saying and I understand what you're saying, but I feel like what's missing is the pride in being Black. You know, from
No, but I
that.
think a lot of times people push it too far.
Mhm.
Like, I think we should all, at some level, try to be human beings.
Yeah.
And so I find that people are pushing the Blackness in a lot of cases too hard. And I think mostly it's people who are young and people who haven't had a lot of experiences.
Mhm.
But I just want to, I mean, I think when I feel most Black is when we have something to fight for. Like all these young men, like CNN says, 1,000 Black men are killed by police every year.
Mhm.
That's absurd,
Yeah.
or when we have to fight against the idealism or sensibilities of somebody like Donald Trump,
Mhm.
where there's injustice and it's so obvious that, so it doesn't mean that I'm negating my Black experience
Yeah.
or that I'm trying to be something, because I do not see myself, I see myself as an American because that's the place I am and that's the culture that I most adhere to.
Mhm.
I remember when I was in England, when I was on the Fulbright and I lived there for a year,
Mhm.
and I thought it was really interesting that the people that I was most connected with were white Americans because we had shared experiences. We laughed at the same jokes. We celebrated the same holidays and things like that. And that surprised me.
You know what? I think what I hear you saying too, that I really am learning I think this is so great that we're having this conversation. First of all, I need to name that, is that what the only time is when someone is, I think white people actually feel that sense of entitlement to Americanness. And when they are trying to, and you feel it because you are it, and then they try and take it away from you because they don't think that we deserve it. And so that's when you're like, no, I'm going to fight for this because I'm just as an American as you are.
Right.
Right.
I'm an American.
I'm an
I've been
American.
enough places to know that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. Oh, wow. I learned so much having this conversation. Okay. How do you think racism impacts your family though?
Well, I think that for myself, I can have this unique experience, but it scares me to think that it might not be for all of us.
Mhm.
That the young men in the family don't have the same. Not that we have a great deal of um, protection, but that they might not have protection. And so I think that we still have to build our own coalitions and
Mhm.
march and do whatever we have to do to change this society.
Yeah.
But what we can't do is we can't make ourselves alien to it and say, I'm not American. This isn't my country. Okay, well, where is your country?
Yeah. Yeah.
What country do you? So, I mean, we're here, so we have to make the most of it, and we have to keep struggling to um, to make it work for us.
Mhm. So, you've talked a little bit about police brutality and the impact of it. And one of the things that um, I've found, even in this conversation, to speak to your point, is like almost every single person in our family that I've interviewed thus far has had a negative uh, encounter with the police, and I just think it's just names for me the systematicity of it, of this sort of idea about how it is that the police are supposed to interact and engage with the Black community. But I wonder, for you, have you specifically had these conversations and talks with, with your family, with your children about
I
the?
haven't, and I thought about that because I've been like glued to CNN since this whole thing started happening with George Floyd. And a lot of the Black men are saying that they had these discussions with their sons.
Mm.
And so, and I thought, gee, we never had this
But we
discussion.
did, Mom. And so I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but remember when Oscar Grant was killed?
Hmm.
And you remember how you insisted that we march? And we took, like, my kids, he died 10 years ago, and my kids, that was when they first started marching, and that was because of you. And because you were saying at that time, not one more death, and we marched to the streets of Oakland because you demanded that.
Yeah.
You don't
But
remember
when
that?
I was speaking, I wasn't talking about marching. I was basically talking about literally sit down with my kids and have a talk with them about the impacts of racism and what things to be very careful about.
No, and we've never had that conversation because,
That's what I was talking about.
right, but I think that we're having that conversation now, and I think it's also because of the ideas that we just talked about, that we have had conversations about racism, but you always said you need to see yourself as an American. Right.
Because I think you have to demand privilege.
Right.
You can't say they're privileged. Well, you're privileged too. And perhaps in many cases more privileged because you have achieved more in your life. Because sometimes when people think they're privileged, they lose sight of trying to achieve anything.
Yeah.
And so as a result, they just stay stagnant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. Right. It's like you don't need a goal because you've
Yeah,
got everything you think you.
you think you have everything, but you have nothing.
Hmm.
Or you don't have, by comparison, as much as you think your neighbor might have.
Yeah. And maybe
And-
that's why there's
Mhm.
this anger. Because I've been like I would I had the first interview that I did was with Sister Babalawa, and she was talking about trauma and how it is that like we respond to trauma. And she said there's three reactions. One is like freeze, where you kind of just get kind of stuck in place and you don't know how to address it, so you kind of just are frozen. And the other one is fight. And so and I feel like when watching like things burning or seeing people actually protesting and marching and doing all that, this is fight. And then flight is like, just trying to get away. So like the last Rayshard, when
Yeah.
when he was murdered, I felt like he did all three. Like I was watching it and I said, when he first got pulled over, I feel like he was just trying to freeze there and just be, invisible. Because I feel like
He
that
was
talk
the one
is,
that was sleeping in the car,
yeah,
right?
he was sleeping in the
And
car.
he did what he was supposed to do. Pull
Right.
up the road and, wait until you sober up.
Yes. But I think what happened was that it was an ego thing. This is my interpretation
Yeah.
of what I'm seeing. But I felt like Rayshard did all the steps. Like he started off, he froze. He kind of just like, I'm just gonna try and be
He
invisible.
asked them, could he walk to his sister?
Yes, he was just trying to be invisible. Just try and be, demure and do what they want, so that you. And I think that's what the talk is like trying to tell people to just do that, kind of like, don't ruffle any feathers. And I wonder about your generation teaching us that ruffle feathers thing. Because like Sean, when I interviewed Sean, he was saying that. He was like, you're not going to win if you argue with the police. So don't do that. Just like,
You
kind of
have
yes
to
or
think
no, sir.
smart, that's all.
Huh?
I think you have to think smart. If
Mm-hmm.
you have somebody with a gun and you are unarmed, you need to do what they tell them, or you need to make them feel like you agree with them.
Mm-hmm. Just so you can get
They're
out,
armed,
live
so you can
live
get
to.
out of the way and get to safety.
Mm-hmm.
You won't start an argument
Yeah.
with somebody with a gun. Like this guy, when the kid was running away, he's not a kid, 27, but he knew the taser was an illegal weapon in his life. The fact that he was chasing him shows you he wasn't in danger.
Right. But
But
I
it's like these cops, they feel so at ease with, I mean, imagine all the pressure that's on the country now, and you would actually kill somebody,
Mhm.
a black person. That doesn't even make sense.
But you know
What
why he
were
did
you
that,
thinking?
Mom? It was ego. And the reason why I say that is because he could not believe that this black man beat him in the fight and got his gun from him.
And he was drunk.
Right?
Oh,
So
we
he's
know
like,
he was drunk.
it was like a how dare you moment. And it was a put you in your place moment. So if that means you have to die, then that's what it is. And that's where
But
I
are we getting sidetracked?
well, I know because we're talking about police brutality,
Okay.
and so that's the point, right? Which is to kind of understand how it is that the police interact with us, which is sort of my last question about this is like, how do you think Or what do you think about the police's interactions with the Black community?
Well, I think it's a good idea to defund the police and channel that money into social programs
Mm-hmm.
because the police are not, I mean, we want our kids to grow up fearing the police.
Yeah.
And the police have been just outrageous. And most of the guys who join these things, they don't even think. I mean, if Trump tells you to go kill some innocent protesters or, fire bombs or tear gas, what is that saying? What is he making you into?
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole system needs to be revamped. But I like the idea of calling it a neo-lynching, because that's what it is. It's a continuation of that system of genocide.
Yeah. All right. Well, we need to end on a positive note. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna focus. I'm gonna switch gears and talk about family because I feel like
Go back to family
because we started with it. So we're going right. Perfect. Okay. So share a memory that means a lot to you and a family memory, and why does that memory stand out for you?
Well, when you said that, I thought about Carmen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about when we lived in Virginia, and my grandmother had a house in Virginia with her husband, Paul, and my Aunt Bunk and Ray Ray was there. I don't think Mikey was born, and or the others are younger. And Carmen and I, and we lived on a property that we had since the 1800s that was given to us by Fred Green. And next door was
You have to say who Fred Green is.
Fred Green was the slaveholder who had our family, and he had 9 children by my great great grandmother, and
Great, great, great.
ooh, great great, and the house next door used to be in our family, and my great grandmother used to live there, and Carmen and I used to play with Stanley, who used to live there. His family had that house. And so I just remember Ray Ray in the carriage and us being out there and taking pictures in the yard.
Mm. Okay, so how would you describe your family to others?
Well, it depends on what part of my family. Which part of my family?
You tell me, like when you think of family, which part do you think of?
Well, I think of immediate family and I also think of extended family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think family's really great. And it's a buffer, it's a support system.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wish our family was even closer.
Yeah. So what role do you play in the family? And
Well, it's changing. Now I tend to be the matriarch. So I'm like, and it gets to that point so fast that at first, I remember when I went to the first family reunion that I had gone to in Virginia, and there it was layers. My Aunt Bunk and she and Dolores had put this together. And then there were the great aunts. And what amazes me is how fast you get to be a great aunt. I'm like, I'm not ready yet.
I'm already a grandmother, so
Huh?
I said I'm already a grandmother.
I know you're moving on up.
All right, what role does family play in your life and why?
Well, I think family is community.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking, this is changing the subject, but I was thinking since Carmen passed, it would be nice to like invite Michelle to uh, to come up again
Yeah.
and to see her, and so that you have to constantly expand
Yeah.
because otherwise you recede.
Yes.
And so, and even with friends,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah. I see that. Okay, who taught you to value family and how did they teach you that?
Well, I think my mother's family was very close, and my father's family was very close. But my mother's family, a lot of people argued a lot. So that was hard. My father's family was built around the marriage of my grandfather and grandmother. So, and they all lived in the same area, they all lived in the same block. So, I guess that, and then when grandpop and we called her Nana, died, it left this gap.
Mhm. Um, okay, so how would you like to be remembered by the family?
Well, I would like to be remembered for my good things, but I think too often I'm remembered for my bad things. To be an achiever, to strive, and to get the things that you want and the things that are important, and to always keep goals in mind,
Mhm.
and constantly strive for goals. Like I'm getting ready to retire
Yeah.
after summer school, and I'm thinking, somebody said to me, um, what are you going to do? You're going to have nothing to do. And I'm like, me have nothing to do. I could think of it that I could paint, I could draw, I can read. Well, I can't travel now with COVID-19, but once the bands are cut, broken, severed, that we'll be able to travel again.
Yeah.
And travel will be a lot different. But I was thinking about Hawaii,
Yeah.
that I would love to. That was extraordinary. And even though I had been to Hawaii before, that when we went, it was such a special time.
It was. Yeah. It really
Or
was.
to New York and to see some of my friends.
Yes. All right, so I have two final questions. The first one is who in the family has been your biggest teacher and share something that they taught you that you will never forget.
Um, Teacher, I would have to say my mother.
Mhm.
And I think my mother taught me that you could be anything that you want to be,
Mhm.
and that you don't limit yourself to. And even though when we were growing up, I used to think like she had all these little rules that you can't curse, you can't do this, you can't do that. But at the same time, she was telling us, you can, yes, you can, and go after it.
Mm.
Because she never said you can't.
Yeah.
I said, I want to be a movie star. She would say, who do you want to be like?
Oh, that's beautiful. All right, this is the final question. What do you want everyone to know about what it means to be a part of a Black family? Well, an American family. I was going to say a Black family in America, but I think
Yeah, thank you. But I think the best thing is for
American family who's
now,
descended from Africans.
descent.
Right.
I
Sorry.
think the best thing is the level of opportunity that's available for you, and the idea that you can be, and if you are willing to work, pull up your bootstraps, and I hope that's not Republican.
Yes, it is. I was like, let's not end
That
on
word,
I don't know. You were talking about opportunities for families.
oh God, that got way out of hand. But let me say,
Non sequitur.
non sequitur, that's true. So let me see. I don't think I can bring it back without thinking very. So
Okay. Can I
let
ask
me
the
ask you
question
a
again?
question.
Can I ask the
Yeah,
question again? Okay. What do you think? What do you want people to know about
Black
what
family.
or being a part of the family in America?
I think that we really do have a lot of opportunity that we think we don't think of ourselves as having.
Mm.
And that people all over the world are just, the world's in such a terrible shape in a lot of places because of war, and America's caused a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can't afford to sit back and just watch,
Yeah.
because maybe this is it. Maybe this is Rome and it's crumbling, and this is the first part of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think in spite of that, that we have more opportunity and more options than most of the world.
And we need to make a contribution.
And we need to make a contribution. Thank you. That was a great way to end it.
So what was the question you have for me?
How do you see the African, oops, oops, the American family?
You know, um, I think our family, I don't know every family, but I could say our family is such a blessing, and I think, and I think this is just these conversations is just been a joy for me to participate in and to learn, and to talk to just the closeness. And I really appreciate and value the work that you and your sisters did, because you
Mm-hmm.
ensured that connectedness that we have. And like our kids, even my kids, they communicate, and they're very close to like Mateen's kids and Shelly's kids and Doug's kids. Like they have their own chat. Randy, London, like they all talk to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that you instilled in that, like your parents instilled in you, and then you instilled in us, and then we instilled in our children. And hopefully, they will have that for their children. So I feel like that connectedness and that sense of community, as you said, like the importance of the community is really important. And I also feel very strongly the contribution is like we can't just leave without leaving something behind that is going to be of importance. So this is one of the reasons why I'm trying to do this, because I feel that I got that from you, that sense of responsibility for that. And so I really appreciate that from you and talking to you. I love you.
God bless you, Miss.
Mwah, mwah, mwah. Thank you, Mom.
Well,